All right, it is 6:06, and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'll look for a motion to approve the revised agenda, which I believe everyone has seen at this point. Moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by Councillor Duggan. Any additions or deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. That takes us on to the July 13th, 2021 meeting minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve those. Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right, we have a couple public hearings and presentations. First, we have a presentation of Construction Safety Nova Scotia regarding a certificate of recognition designation to the town of Lunenburg. And I believe Jonathan White is with us to present.
You just click on the, there we go. Hi everybody, thank you for having me participate here tonight. I'm Jonathan White, I'm the Director of Safety Services for Construction Safety. Firstly, I just want to recognize the hard work that Lunenburg's done in terms of the core certification. So tonight I'm just going to explain to Council in terms of who construction safety are, what the work has been undertaken, and what that actually means in terms of the achievement overall. So firstly, in terms of construction safety, the name itself implies we're here for the construction industry, and yes, we are. We were originally set up by the construction industry of Nova Scotia 25 years ago. So we're a long-standing, not-for-profit organisation that has been supporting that industry through training and education. However, that isn't just what we are. Through the 25 years, what we've done now is branched out and we support a lot of other industries. So we support the utility industries, Halifax Water being one, Nova Scotia Power. We do a lot for not-for-profit industries as well, other associations that cover off the province. We also do a lot of municipalities as well. So we've been working with a lot of municipalities for several years now. Not all are core certified. And that happened mainly because, and I don't know how many of you are aware of some of the history here, but New Glasgow had a significant fatality several years ago, and they were actually ordered to become core certified. So through that engagement through New Glasgow, we recognized that there was the need there to participate with municipalities and to offer our services and support both in training, but coaching and mentoring in terms of assistance of that program. Other ones that we work with as well are ISANs, so the Immigration Society. We work with a lot of schools and other government bodies as well. So Transport, Active Transit, one of our core members as well. So we've got a really broad net and we've been involved with a lot of industry and government throughout the province. So what do we represent? For core certification, it's a nationally recognized standard. So the standard itself goes right across the country. It is actually seen as one of the better safety standards that you can actually achieve. And in doing so, you automatically achieve WCB safety standard as well. So this goes a little bit beyond. Typically, our results have seen that anybody who's core certified, in terms of their accident levels of injuries, are typically around 35% less if you're core certified. So from that point of view, you're mitigating risk and you're also doing the best for your employees and staff, but also the general public as well, and also subcontractors. So from core certification, it becomes very much an active program that you participate in year on year. And I can say that, initially it involves a gap analysis to what your safety program is originally. We then look at the processes and procedures and look to develop those. Then we look to educate. So we've done a lot of education through managers, supervisors, and down to all levels of staff. And then on top of that, we do the compliance training, which is actually legally required through the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So in doing so, you then have a very robust safety program, which you can then maintain year on year, and knowing full well that you've got, in theory, the best program possible for the employees of the town and for its residents when they're moving around the municipality. So from that point of view, I'd like to also give a shout out to firstly B for leading the charge on this. The actual work started in 2019, and then through there we've done a lot of work then managed through Paul, and then with our own advisor as well, Laura Langell, who's been assisting and mentoring through that process of getting everything together required for the core certification. And it's with great pleasure that I can say that you have now achieved your core certification. It's you're one of a few municipalities that were able to achieve this so far. It's we're getting more and more municipalities who are working towards their core, because it's the best and the right thing for them to do for their municipality. So in doing that, I really want to congratulate you for being at the forefront of that. In terms of our support from construction safety, we will obviously see this as a significant moment for yourselves as well. So we post these achievements on social media through our own network and through our website. And we also post within the local newspapers the achievement for the municipality, because it is significant in terms of what you've been able to achieve and how you've gone about it. Overall, I think the actual process itself has been fairly slick on our part, and we've seen some great progression, great engagement. It involved all departments of the municipality. Everybody participated, and hopefully you'll see the benefits for years to come in terms of both reduced accidents and injuries, but also as well just from having a safe process that people can follow and have knowledge of how to implement and do the best safety training and advice for individuals as they move through. So on that, I would just like to ask if there's any questions, but mostly I really want to congratulate the team and the town of Lunenburg for this significant achievement. You're in select ranks, hopefully a growing number as we move forward throughout the years. But it's a really, really big achievement to have done, and congratulations to everybody that's participated.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to staff. Are there any questions of council for Jonathan at this particular stage? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And just note that Laura has also joined us, Laura Langell from Construction Safety Nova Scotia. Pleasure to have you with us. All right, that takes us on to item 5B, Stellar Investments request to extend the development agreement for 101 Masons Beach Road. This was a late-breaking item. The application has been withdrawn, and so we can forego a public hearing. There's a motion to that effect. Is it anyone's pleasure to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Birtles. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right, that takes us on to the proposed repeal and replacement of the municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, and subdivision bylaw. Public hearing with written and verbal public submissions. So I will turn it over to Upland or to Arthur to introduce the public hearing, and then we can proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have some housekeeping comments to make with regards to the public hearing process. This is a public hearing to hear public comments with regards to our proposed municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw with specifications. So in terms of the process, I just wanted to point out that after the public hearing is held, council may make a decision or defer decisions to a later date. Please note that the time for questions from the gallery is during the public hearing. Once the hearing is closed, discussion is to be between council members only. After the public hearing, councilmen may make a decision. There are a few general rules. For those that wish to make a verbal presentation, we ask that you state your name and civic address clearly so that we may record it in the minutes. Speakers will be limited to one presentation unless called upon by the chair for further comment. Council members may ask each speaker any questions that they deem appropriate, and comments and questions by the public are to be directed to the chair. At first, I'll do a brief presentation, then I'll turn it over to Upland Planning and Design to do a presentation. Council has received written submissions, and we just received a late submission just prior to the meeting from Linda Mills. I hope everybody was able to see a copy of that. And then we'll open up the floor for public comments. So this is a work of the town from Project Lunenburg. We developed a comprehensive community plan with much public input and over the last 2.5 years. And one of the outcomes is actually a new planning strategy, land use bylaw, and subdivision bylaw. So we're here now to hold a public hearing in that regard. And I'd like to pass it over to Upland Planning and Design to take us through a PowerPoint presentation to outline what that entails. So I'll pass it over to Upland. Thank you.
Share my screen, I think, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Council. This is the public hearing for the draft planning documents, municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw, and associated specifications. For those who don't know yet, my name is Ian Watson, Senior Planner with Upland, and I'm joined by my colleague Stefan as well tonight. And we've been working with the town over the past, I guess it is 2.5 years now, on the Project Lunenburg project. As Arthur mentioned, a huge bulk of work was done over the past 2.5 years with extensive public engagement, a variety of workshops, both public and internally, and with council, to develop a comprehensive community plan that looks at the future of the town from all aspects, not just land use planning. And this is kind of unique within the Nova Scotia context, and it's pretty exciting. So that document was adopted, I believe, back in November, and it includes a whole host of recommended strategic actions for the town, from everything on servicing to development to parkland to arts and culture, and implementation of these tools or of these actions, strategic actions, will happen through a variety of tools, partnerships, bylaws, investments. But one of the major implementing tools for a lot of them, or that particularly ones related to land use and development, are the municipal planning strategy. Update those with the dates. And flowing from that, the land use bylaw and the subdivision bylaw. And these are documents that, again, control land use and development. The municipal planning strategy being the higher level policy, and then the land use bylaw and subdivision being the regulations that actually result in action. So through the process of the comprehensive community plan, as I mentioned, there's pretty extensive public consultation and also a fair bit of background research on our team's part. And there were a number of key issues that came out of this work, particularly or specifically dealing with land use. And so in developing the new planning documents, we very much attempted to address these key issues, including housing, diversity, affordability, access, preserving the working waterfront, ensuring that infrastructure within the town is sustainable, both environmentally, but particularly financially, addressing climate change, both our contributions to it and the expected effects that it's going to have on the town, and then also viewing Lunenburg through a lens of living heritage and really encapsulating, capturing the history and heritage of Lunenburg while also remaining a vibrant and evolving community. So the way we structured the planning documents and the way I think it makes the most sense to go through them tonight, and you may have seen a similar presentation earlier in this process, is that in Nova Scotia, traditionally when it comes to planning, the approach is, everybody's kind of familiar with it. You have zoning, but you just have one zone on your property. It might be residential low density R1 or downtown commercial C1 or something like that. And that zone controls the types of uses that are allowed on your property, the height and stuff for buildings, and the standards for when you're creating lots, the lot size and frontage and all that kind of thing. And it's a pretty straightforward process in that you have the one zone that you have to worry about, but it requires a lot of exceptions and special conditions to make these zones work all across a municipality or a town. So we wanted to do something a little innovative and cutting edge with Project Lunenburg, and really think Lunenburg is the place to do this. It's really got a diverse landscape even within a small area, and really a history of change and a mixing of uses and forms. So we thought this was a really good opportunity to try something new. So the planning structure that we've used is each lot within Lunenburg will now have actually three zones: a lot zone, which controls subdivisions and infrastructure; a use zone, which affects the types of uses that are permitted on a property; and then a form zone that controls the form of buildings. And what this allows is really clear structure for the documents. If you're dealing with creating a new lot to give to your sibling, you're dealing with your lot zone, and you can look in that section of the document. Or if you're opening a restaurant and want to know where you're allowed to have a restaurant, you look in the use zone and deal with that section of the document. It also allows really fine-grained planning for each piece of property in Lunenburg, because we can overlay these three different zones to get different effects. And as a result of that, it means the documents themselves have to have a lot fewer exceptions and notwithstandings and all those things that make planning complicated and hard to wrap your head around. So the first aspect of this, as I mentioned, is lot zones. And I apologize, I didn't put the imperial conversions in the presentation, but they are in the documents. So what we've created is 4 separate lot zones, and these are really based on a review of the existing conditions in Lunenburg. The original British town plan is a really strong defining feature. Then you go to other neighborhoods like Newtown, where the lot sizes are a little bigger, and that gives a very different feel to the communities. And then you get into new areas where it's, again, a different feel owing to the way the roads are laid out and lots are laid out. So we have 4 lot zones. The first applies primarily to Old Town, very small lots. There's also notably a maximum lot area in this zone to avoid consolidation of whole blocks that could quote unquote blockbustering that would really negatively affect that character in Old Town. Small minimum frontages, and again a maximum to avoid that consolidation. Lot Zone 2 is much larger. It applies to the area of Newtown, again, based on the existing that's there. Lot Zone 3 is primarily for newer areas of development and soon to be, or not yet developed areas. It's a slightly smaller lot size and and to take advantage of services and make efficient use of land. And then there's Lot Zone 4, which is for those special cases, industrial uses, parks that don't necessarily adhere to the traditional lot needs. So there you have it. There's a lot zoning map. Again, you can see that there's zones applied to each property in the town. So closely tied to lots and the creation of lots and the subdivision process is infrastructure, sewer, water, roads. These are important assets in the town for enabling development and enabling compact development and enabling people to get around. But they're also a financial liability and that need to be renewed over time. So we want to make the most of them, of these infrastructures as possible where they exist. So the new documents require development to connect to sewer where it exists and water where it exists. Again, spreading that burden among as many users as possible. They also prohibit new private roads. So within the town, the town owns most roads. The capability is there to maintain additional ones and avoid some of the complications that come with private roads. Additionally, we have kind of gone back to the past and implemented some new road standards, which I'll turn over to Stefan to talk about. I guess I still got to click. You're muted, Stefan.
Classic 2020 mistake. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so we've added one particular new road standard to the subdivision bylaw, and that is intended to essentially emulate the scale and experience of the residential roads of the upper Old Town in Lunenburg. Those are, there's an example, Cornwallis Street, so very narrow streets, not just streets, also narrow right-of-ways, buildings that are built up right against the sidewalk. And, most people would agree, a very pleasant experience that is quite different from the way we build roads in subdivisions today. And the reason why we don't see these roads is because these road standards of the last 5 decades, or since the dawn of the automobile, really were driven by accommodating the automobile. And currently in the town of Lunenburg, if you followed the current subdivision bylaw, you couldn't actually build a road like this. So the cross section Ian had in the previous slide, again, borrows or references these old standards. So with very narrow travel lanes of 3 meters, and then narrow right-of-way with 13 meters, and the requirement to have a sidewalk on one side of the street.
Also related to subdivision is the parks and open space dedication process. So in Nova Scotia, when lands are subdivided, municipalities are able to require the dedication of open space land or lands for the purposes of providing public open space. And that can come in the form of land or in the form of cash that then gets used to improve public open spaces or acquire new ones. The Municipal Government Act allows municipalities to require up to 10% as part of subdivision. That is the approach we've taken in these documents, recognizing the need for new parks and open space lands in the areas that aren't developed, and also reinvesting in existing facilities. One of the things we heard a lot in engagement is a desire for public access to the coast and to the harbor. So the way the parks and open space dedication is structured in the documents is that if subdivision is happening on land with access to the coast, then the requirement will be for the dedication to be of land that provides public access to the coast. Where that's not the case, will require cash when you're within 400-meter distance of an existing public park, basically recognizing that these facilities already exist and we want to reinvest in them. And then otherwise, if you're outside of that radius and not on the coast, it would be usable land just for the creation of new parks in new areas of town. So that's the parts of the document that primarily deal with lots and infrastructure. The next big piece, of course, as I mentioned, is land use. So what are the types of uses that are permitted on a piece of land? So we've created a series of use zones. You know, if you've looked at planning documents before, these are pretty in alignment with how documents are usually structured: residential, commercial, industrial, parks and recreation. And then similarly to the lot zones, we have a use zoning map that again applies a use zone to every lot within Lunenburg. So you can look that up and see what's permitted on your property. And then in the document, in the land use bylaw, we have a series of tables that show what's permitted in each use zone. So for example, in the residential lower density residential use zone, you have accessory dwellings, you can have bed and breakfasts, you can have dwellings with up to 2 units, and you can have small options homes as residential uses, where, for example, in the higher density residential, there's no limit on the number of dwellings, and you can also have nursing homes, etc. Something that's worth calling out here as we're looking at this table, the residential use table, is one of the big changes in these new documents is the creation of an accessory dwelling land use. So this permits basically either within the main dwelling, so as a secondary suite, basement suite, whatever you want to call it, or as a backyard suite, carriage house, whatever you want to call that. So an additional dwelling on the lot with restrictions on the size and height and all that kind of stuff to really make sure that they're accessory. Similarly, there's a table for institutional uses, again, permitted or not permitted based on the zone. Don't think there's anything atypical in this table. The big one, of course, is commercial uses. So there are two primary commercial zones, the commercial mixed use and the general commercial zone, which allow a wide range of commercial uses. The main difference being auto-related uses are permitted in the mixed and not in the general. Other pieces from this that are worth calling out are, I think the main one is short-term rentals. So this is something we did hear a lot about in the engagement process. You know, both the potential benefits of short-term rentals, and when I say this, I mean things like this is a rental of a dwelling for less than 30 days. So people commonly think of Airbnb or VRBO, but it doesn't have to be on those platforms necessarily. But we did hear a fair bit about the potential benefits, but also, you know, the concerns about negative impacts in terms of housing stock and also just neighborhoods from having guests in and out and that kind of thing. So the comprehensive community plan does provide direction in relation to short-term rentals. The idea being that they be permitted in primary residences, and that if it's not your primary residence, then you're basically being treated like a commercial accommodation, a hotel or whatever, and need to be in the appropriate zone. As I mentioned, the CCP will have a lot of implementing tools. These documents are one of them, and we use them to the extent that we can. So we've permitted them with restrictions on there only being one per lot and not permitted in accessory buildings. And then the CCP has a recommendation for a standalone short-term rental bylaw that would control things like, primary residence and licensing and that kind of stuff, and would be a more efficient tool for that aspect of short-term rentals. don't know if there's anything else there. The new documents do, address things that wouldn't have been considered last time around, things like electrical vehicle charging and that kind of thing. Similarly, there's a table for industrial uses, and the one thing that I want to call out here is you see in the table here, it says DA, so those are uses that are permitted by development agreement rather than as of right. And one of the major changes with these documents is a move away from using development agreements for a lot of uses. If you looked at any of the other tables, they were all just permitted, or not. And again, this is, I think, one of the benefits of this layered zoning that we have, is that we can control a lot of the different aspects that you'd want to consider with the development agreement by how we layer the 3 zones. So there's really only a need for that higher level of control and also the more extensive process that you go through for some really big ticket items. And so in this case, heavy industrial is one where you'd want to have a closer look and go through that full process. And finally, the table for other type uses, and some of the things that the new documents address are, for example, explicitly allowing solar collector systems. So in this case, this would be on a large scale standalone, but there's also permissions in there for as an accessory use on, on your roof or standalone on the ground, accessory to a dwelling. Urban agriculture as well is a big one. So permissions for small scale keeping of chickens or bees, clear allowances for things like community gardens, really addressing a lot of those things we heard about through the CCP. Got ahead of myself there. Oh yeah, also wind turbines, accessory wind turbines, small scale. Related to use, and one of the really common things you see in planning documents is requirements for minimum parking provisions. So, a certain number of spaces based on the use. And as we got into the drafting of the documents and started to look at what this would actually mean in Lunenburg, we came to the conclusion that it would make sense to not actually have specific requirements for parking in Lunenburg, automobile parking. Old Town, Lunenburg already had an exemption from parking requirements. You don't want to force people to tear down buildings, old buildings just to accommodate parking. Residential areas, they tend to provide the parking they need. They're not the big driver of the need. And then Victoria Road, the one major other commercial area, has substantial space to accommodate parking. Property owners aren't necessarily forced to choose between having more floor area and parking. So, thought we'd take an innovative step. This is kind of starting to happen throughout North America, but actually remove those requirements from the document. We have, however, implemented minimum bicycle parking space requirements. There's exceptions for example, existing buildings that are close to a lot and you can't accommodate them or that kind of thing. But bicycle tourism is growing. Bicycling as both recreation and for utility purposes, getting groceries and that kind of thing, certainly exploded during the pandemic. And really recognizing that need to safely lock up bicycles and also to avoid people locking their bike to street trees and damaging them and that kind of stuff. In the document, so a non-conforming use, obviously there was a day before planning ever existed, and certainly Lunenburg has existed long before planning. Also plans change, planning documents change, so you get situations where what may have been permitted in the past might not be permitted in contemporary planning documents, and you end up with what's called a non-conforming use, where maybe you have a commercial use in a residential, what's now seen as a residential neighborhood. The Municipal Government Act provides protections for those non-conforming uses. They can recommence if they've been discontinued for less than 6 months. That's a really short time in the grand scheme of things. So we've expanded that to 12 months through these documents. And we've also enabled expansion or conversion to another non-conforming use by development agreement if the impact can be shown to be equal to or lesser than the existing non-conforming use. So you might be able to take a non-conforming restaurant, which has noises and smells and all that, and maybe it would be reasonable to convert it to a non-conforming retail store, which is still non-conforming but less impactful. So that's use. The third aspect is form. Stefan, do you want to introduce this one?
Sure. Yeah, as Ian mentioned earlier in his presentation, Lunenburg has a very clear pattern when it comes to the evolution of the town, growing out from the old town to the new town to the other areas. And Lunenburg is probably one of the best documented heritage or historic districts in Canada. And so it was a real pleasure diving into that as we were working on this plan. And what we're trying to establish with the form chapter of the bylaw is, again, referencing those patterns, built form patterns. And there's a few snapshots here. You see quite clearly the differences between for example, Old Town 1 and what we call Old Town, New Town 2 with regards to setbacks from the street, building heights, massing, lot line minimums, and so on. So next slide, please, Ian. So following that, we've created a number of residential zones. So most of them essentially are a continuation of the standards of the current bylaw. But then as we go into undeveloped areas, or in particularly the area around Victoria Road, we've introduced some additional form zones, namely a Main Street form zone that will facilitate an evolution over time of Victoria Road into more of a Main Street experience. So there are again, the different zones. You see quite clearly on the left there, the dark pink area that would be Victoria Road. And there's also the pink to the north, or the light orange. Those are areas where we allow for higher densities and larger buildings, multi-unit buildings. Next slide. So again, in the Old Town, very little has changed except that we introduced a maximum setback from the road right of way, and that's essentially to guarantee that people who built new don't have a very large setback from the street that's not characteristic for the area. Then if we jump to the other setbacks, that's not, there's nothing unusual in there. Let's switch to the next slide. Thank you. Accessory building placement. This is again consistent with the current regulations, more or less. So in terms of the minimum side yards and so on, there's very little change. One thing that we've taken a closer look at is maximum lot coverage. So this is the percentage of a building footprint, both for a main building and an accessory building, that the percentage of that's taken up of your entire lot. And we've run an analysis and found that there's there's quite a bit of room compared to other bylaws for essentially intensifying established residential areas through something that we call, for example, gentle density, so building backyard suites or adding accessory units to an existing building footprint. So we increased the lot coverage to 50% in Old Town 2 and then 40% in the Old Town, New Town zones. With regards to the main building massing, we haven't changed any of the maximum building heights in the established areas. We've added a minimum height in the Old Town 1, and this is essentially the old central business district of the Old Town. And the minimum height there is meant to prevent essentially the type of one-story commercial buildings that we would have seen developed maybe in the 70s or 80s that don't really fit the character of Old Town, the Old Town commercial district. And so a minimum height should prevent those developments in the future. And then really the biggest change again is Main Street. So this is Victoria Road area again, where we allow 6-story buildings. The building code now allows for 6-story wood construction, so it's an economical way for developers to build. And also what we've included is some parameters for minimum ground floor heights that should foster a pleasant kind of pedestrian retail experience for ground floor retail and services. And we also have a minimum street wall height and a maximum street wall height. So those are essentially is the first area when you picture yourself on a sidewalk, you look up a building to the cornice or the edge of the roof. There can be, so this can be maximum 16 meters high, and then the building has to step back to the interior of the lot by 3 meters, and what that does to the viewer or to the pedestrian is that they actually don't notice the height that's behind that setback. It's out of your view. And then we also have, in terms of, again, residential multi-unit buildings in New Town 1, which would be new areas of development, we allow, again, 6-story wood frame construction, or 6-story buildings in general. Accessory building massing. So these are, buildings separate from your main building in your lot. These can be 8 meters high. And then a completely new, fairly recent form of living are these so-called group dwellings. These are multiple dwellings on one lot, which is currently not allowed. And what those allow somebody to do, a group of residents or commercial operations, is to essentially create small units that still allow you to live within your own house when you want to downsize as an empty nest or retiree. But you can, often these group dwellings have a shared service building with, kitchen areas, guest suites, things like that. And it's become quite a popular way of living, aging within your community, but not having to take care of your old Lunenburg house that needs a lot of renovations.
And it's not just for seniors housing either. Like, if anyone's familiar with, for example, the Treehouse Eco Village in Bridgewater, it's structured as a bare land condominium, but from a land use point of view, it would be a similar thing where you've got multiple dwellings on one lot. town services. Also related to form, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, climate change is on the horizon and is something that's on a lot of people's minds. And in Nova Scotia, certainly one of the biggest things that we expect to experience is the effects of a rising sea, both from climate change rising the waters and the fact that Nova Scotia is slowly sinking. That adds up to higher seas. So through these planning documents, we've addressed this by, there's a schedule map in the land use bylaw, the flood risk area map. It identifies the areas that we expect to be at risk of flooding in the coming decades. Through modeling, we kind of expect sea level rise of about a meter over the next 80 odd years. And then you combine that with a big storm, hurricane and high tide, and you can get some pretty bad flooding. So the flood risk areas capture the areas where we expect that to be a risk. And within these areas, development has to acknowledge the risks of flooding there. And then any development that has habitable areas, so places where people might live, those habitable areas have to be on, for example, upper floors of the building or on parts of the lot that are above this risk elevation. These letters might seem like gobbledygook. They're what the surveyors use as a reference point for vertical elevation. Also, additionally, industrial uses or other uses that might have hazardous materials need to store them properly and safely, either above that elevation or in a manner that's designed to prevent flooding or damage in the event of flooding. And finally, that infrastructure that could be flood vulnerable. So you're thinking things like building backup generators, electrical panels, that kind of stuff needs to be above that elevation. There's the flood risk area map. It's also, a number of smaller form-related things like signage. There's some things we cleaned up and requests we addressed. So including projecting signs, the ones that stick out from a building, allowing them to be a little lower and a little more effective. Did a lot of work simplifying the language around signs, and then addressed some things that have come up since the documents were last adopted. So things like menu board signs and digital signs. Parking, as much as I said we don't require parking, if you do provide parking, there are standards within the document for how that parking should look. So large parking lots, larger than 18 spaces, need to be broken down into individual bays, broken up by landscaping and that kind of thing. Limits on the amount of parking in the front yard. And then there are requirements for electrical vehicle charging in structured parking. So structured parking would be like underground parking or parking garages. Similarly to non-conforming uses, you can have a non-conforming structure. So again, that might be a house that was built close to the road before there were minimum front setbacks. And now if you were to build that house today, you wouldn't be allowed to build that close, or something like that, where you don't meet the standards of the current bylaw. What we do clearly allow in the noun documents now is that these non-conforming structures can be expanded as long as they don't make the non-conformity worse. So if you have your house that's too close to the street, the documents don't prevent you from adding a kitchen at the back into your backyard, as long as you otherwise meet the bylaw. Obviously, one of the really big topics is heritage and architectural control. This is the updating of the rules related to these is a fairly large undertaking, and the town is engaged to do this work. However, in the interest of getting the current documents approved and in place, the work was split into two. So the plan is that these documents for now basically copy and paste what's in the existing planning documents with some minor changes to make it all work with the new format. And then once the new municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw are adopted, there will be a project to come back and take a closer look at these heritage and architectural control aspects of the documents. Also, as part of this work, we went through all the definitions, updated them as necessary, made sure there was definitions for everything. And, you know, in an attempt at usability for the documents, whenever we thought illustration would help the concept or the definition, added those in to make it easier to use. So that is the highlights of the documents as they've been drafted, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that comprehensive presentation as always. We will open the public hearing then. As Arthur stated, when speaking, we'd ask that you state your name and your civic address. People will have 10 minutes, followed by up to 10 minutes, followed by 5 minutes of questions. And if anyone wants to speak on the participant side, then they can raise their hand and Heather will give you speaking rights accordingly. First, I believe we have some of the folks who've made written submissions wanting to speak. So first on my list, I have Nona White and Peter Allen.
Thank you, Mayor Risser and councilors, for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Nona White. I live at 12893 Highway 3 and Rhodes Corner, but I'm here on behalf of my parents, Russell and Diane Crouse, of 101 Hurdle Road in Lunenburg. They own 13 acres of property located between Victoria Road and Green Street, which has been in the family since 1875. They have concerns regarding the proposed zoning change that may affect part of their property. I submitted a letter on July the 13th voicing their concerns and did receive answers to many of the questions asked from Mayor Risser and Arthur McDonald. And I'd like to thank both of them for their help. However, my parents still have many worries and concerns that have not been fully addressed. They recently discovered that almost half of their property is going to be rezoned from residential to parks and recreation. So the town, according to their comprehensive community plan document, can create a new public park on that land in the future. The following is a quote from that plan under section 2.8E, Parks and Public Spaces. Create a centrally located new public park on portions of land bound by Victoria Road, Green Street, and Hurdle Road that stitches together new and intensified surrounding uses. My parents were not aware until very recently about this plan, as they do not use a computer and do not subscribe to the local paper. The public notices in the mail sent to every taxpayer did not have enough pertinent information to raise a red flag that their property was going to be affected to this magnitude. And this project occurred during COVID restrictions and lockdown with limited access to any information. Because the town did not have the courtesy to contact them directly, they were never given the opportunity to voice their concerns and questions at a much earlier date, which may have given them opportunity to provide feedback. By no means am I against the formation of parks and public spaces in the town. I personally have used the town trails daily for the past 22 years. What I am against is potentially forcing someone to give up or sell their private property just because it has been identified through a plan that it would make a good place for a potential new park in the Newtown area. In my opinion, any new park areas should only be created on land currently owned by the town or on land that the town has obtained permission from the landowner. My parents are totally opposed to this zone change and especially this future plan for their property. They are concerned that this change will devalue the property as a whole because half of their property will become very restricted in the way it could be developed. There are very few permitted uses of land zoned as parks and recreation, and as a result, the average person would never want to develop it with those restrictions. Why is it mainly their property being singled out for this extreme zone change and possible creation of a new public park? And why is it almost half of their property being considered for this change? Exactly what part of their land is being considered for the zone change? Nowhere does it specify how many acres or what boundary lines are exactly affected. Finally, they feel that if the zone change takes place, that they will be living with constant uncertainty that one day the town could come and either force them to sell that piece of land at a reduced value or even possibly expropriate it in order to carry out the plan for a public park. Can anyone guarantee that this won't happen or that the creation of a public park isn't really in the town's future intent? Just put yourself in their shoes. How would any of you feel if that was your property and the town was planning on changing it to a future public park without your prior knowledge or consent? In closing, my parents feel that they are about to lose control of a major portion of their homestead because of an unnecessary change brought on by suggestions from a panel of people who didn't even have the courtesy to approach them in person and advise them of how severely this change could affect them and their family. And they earnestly request that you reconsider this zone change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nona. Are there any questions of council, or did the planners want to offer a response? Any questions of council at this stage? All right, seeing none. Any response from our planning team?
Just, do you want us, sorry, Mr. Chair, do you want us to respond to questions as part of the public hearing?
If Nona would like you to respond, then we'll allow 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, the land in question north of Victoria Road in the CCP, it was recognized that as this area of town develops more, that there's a shortage of parkland, and that this is one possible location, recognizing that there's a wetland on part of it, and it was felt there's maybe an opportunity to integrate that into part of that parkland. However, and that was carried through to the draft zoning. However, a fair percentage of the land within this area has been actually placed in that new commercial mixed use zone that promotes commercial and residential development along Victoria Road, with the back portion in the Parks and Recreation zone. It's important to note that the Parks and Recreation zone doesn't affect, nor does any zone in any zoning change. It goes back to that idea of non-conforming use. Does not affect any existing legal uses. They can continue as is. It's only when people come in for new uses that the zoning would come into effect. The other aspects of it there, in terms of whether a town could force someone to sell at reduced or expropriate. In Nova Scotia, the process of municipalities acquiring land is fairly precisely set out in the Municipal Government Act, and it's all done at market value. Even through expropriation, municipalities can compel the sale, but it's still at market value. And again, that would have to require a council to actually want to go through with that compelling of the sale. I don't think was our intention in establishing this area. It was simply identifying it as a potential location for a lacking public amenity in the area. And the zoning also continues to allow additional uses. The Parks and Recreation zone, despite its name, also allows things like private recreation, commercial recreation, things like, for example, the golf course is similarly in that zone, takeout restaurants, that kind of thing.
Thank you. All right. Next on our list, we have Rachel Bailey. Rachel, are you there?
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Thanks as well for the opportunity to speak to council tonight. I appreciate it. This project is very near and dear to me. It was started while I was in office, as you're well aware, and so I've been keenly following the progress. I've been a participant throughout the early stages and have, participated quite intently in the development of these planning documents. So I'm very excited to see them coming to near completion. They have been long awaited and much anticipated, and I would congratulate Uplands on what they've done. I think they have done a great job of incorporating all of the large issues and major concerns that were voiced in the engagement process. It's been a long-standing favorite expression of mine, cliche that it is, that the devil, however, is always in the details. And so if you look at some of the details, I did find some things that I question and that I think are worthy of council's reconsideration in looking to finally approve the documents that are before them in first reading. And this really is a public hearing opportunity. And so I hope that the issues raised here will be given full consideration by council. So you have all received my letter, I'm sure. I have spoken as well to Mr. McDonald and thank Arthur very much for taking hours of his time recently to answer some of the questions I had very thoroughly, and appreciate that. But there were a few outstanding. And I would also mention just on the tail end of Nona's presentation that I too, it's not in the letter I presented, but I too share the concern about, and it was raised in questions with regard to planning affecting private property. And I just maybe point out that it's been my understanding that there was intent to have park space in Centennial Avenue area of town when it was originally developed back in the 60s. And that never happened for whatever reason, but there's space there as well that would certainly be well placed. That's an area where many young families live, and where there would be, the developer of that property still lives in that area and still owns property in that area. And, that might be another area that council and staff could look into for finding that park space that I know is cherished and valued by the community. So the view planes question I posed was really just one to give everyone a level of comfort. I think the form, I recognize that the form regulations that are put in place should address that to some extent. And as I said in the letter, I'm just not sure that it addresses all of the areas. I know, for example, there's a property on Blockhouse Hill that was newly developed that met all of the requirements, and yet poses quite an imposing, it is an imposing structure that obscures view planes from Blockhouse Hill, and it would have had similar regulations in place when it was developed. So that's kind of what raised my concern on that level. The other question, which I do appreciate, Ian got back to me. Thank you, Ian, with respect to the short-term rentals. And I guess I'm just, maybe it's a miscue, I'm not sure, but I really appreciate clarity on the short-term rentals and in residential zones. And I noticed in looking through all of the zoning documents in the land use bylaw about what is permitted, that short-term rentals basically are outrightly permitted. And in speaking to it, Ian has mentioned it as intended to be as a primary residence, that it is permitted. And I totally agree that that is what I understood from public engagement and from all of the many discussions I had with small business owners and residents over time, that that is not an issue, and that is an acceptable use for primary resident to have part of the property used as a short-term rental. But it's it's when a house in its entirety is used as a short-term rental that seems to be problematic. And I still don't really see how that is addressed in the document, and wonder if there isn't another avenue we could look at to regulate that, as I think the expectation of the community truly is. And I'll just carry on so I don't overdo my 10 minutes. But the other question was with respect to Blockhouse Hill. And, even checking back as far, the original future use map from the current land use bylaw allows for or anticipates that residential properties will be developed on Blockhouse Hill. And there was once which new councillors may or may not be aware of, even a artist concept drawing of the development of Blockhouse Hill. So it's certainly a long-standing and accepted expectation that there will be that's a great use of Blockhouse Hill. But what I had a problem with was what actually the definition of park space and where that stops and starts when we're talking about development of Blockhouse Hill. And in all of the previous mappings and plans that were developed that I'm aware of, the park space was greater than what is now reserved as park space at the crest of Blockhouse Hill. And I really think that it's not necessarily in the best interest of the community that park space and the green space be whittled down to basically the cannon area and the grass just to the front of that, when there is opportunity without expropriating from private property or without expectations of developers. Well, the town owns the property that is very prime, and the idea that there's many arguments to be made for it being maintained in the public realm, everything from economic arguments to cultural and ties to the UNESCO designation and the stretch of common land, all sorts of arguments that could be made for the greater preservation of that crest of Blockhouse Hill. So it's not a question of, should we have housing or should we have park space? It's just where the boundaries are. And I would really challenge council to give further consideration to really expanding what the map provides now for park space at the crest of Blockhouse Hill. So thank you. I just the presentation tonight raised one other question in my mind, and so that might be hopefully an easy one to answer. But it mentioned the 100. Oh no, sorry. The minimum height level on the area of Victoria Road, or the Main Street area. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. That's where I live. 219 Victoria Road is my residence. So sorry for omitting that earlier. And I hadn't realized that there was a minimum height. And I guess one of the things that's allowed, for example, was also touched upon in the presentation, is the group dwellings. And it just seemed a little, I thought it seemed a bit of a disconnect that there would have to be, group dwellings that would have a minimum height of quite high, several, more than 2 stories. It seemed that the minimum height would speak to. So that's a quick one I hope you might have an answer to. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'll open the floor if council has any questions. Again, seeing none, we'll let Upland respond to the question with regard to Victoria Road.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, so I'll start with the first one, I guess, the quick and easy one, is that yes, we do recognize, well, in drafting the documents, we recognize that Victoria Road in particular, there are some pretty big, deep lots. And so a lot of these, form requirements that we're intending to put on development along these lots, things like maximum setbacks and minimum heights and stuff that are intended to create that main street feel don't really make sense when you get away from the frontage of the lot and get into the back areas. So there is within the documents in the land use bylaw a recognition of that and more detail on basically only applying those requirements to the first building if there are multiple buildings, the one closest to the street again to fulfill that intent of Main Street form, but also recognize the deeper lots, and that doesn't make sense in the back necessarily.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. So we did receive written submissions from Donnie Parks and Linda Mills. I don't believe either of them are with us.
I don't believe so, Your Worship.
No? Okay, then we have David Friendly with his hand raised.
Your Worship?
Yes?
Just a question to Arthur. He mentioned the letter from Linda Mills. I want to confirm it's not in the agenda package and we're still going to find it here. I don't have a copy of it. Is this the letter from the 12th or is there another letter that came following that from Ms. Mills?
I believe I just received one that just prior to the meeting. Would the chair like me to read that out to the committee?
Sure.
Hello, I am sending this email to state my objections to changes to the zoning to the area in which the current campground exists. Unfortunately, I will probably not be able to attend the public hearing on July 27th as I am involved in a table sale program every Tuesday in the summer. I believe that the campground is an asset to the town. In normal times, the campground is regularly full of many types of campers, RV users, trailer users, tenters, and bikers. The people staying in the campground shop and dine in Lunenburg and take advantage of many recreational opportunities, such as the museum, fishing trips, whale watching trips, wine tours, etc. Without a campground, these visitors may come here for one day, but go elsewhere for other things. If the campground area were the only place for new residential buildings, I would not object, but it is not the only area. There is lots of other lands on which to build. Why not maintain the campground as a recreational area? If in the future that area is needed for residential buildings, the zoning can be revised at that time. In my opinion, that allows the town to have the best of both worlds. Thank you for your consideration, Linda Mills.
Thank you, Arthur. All right, we have David Friendly. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah. Can you turn your video on though?
Didn't usually give me the choice to do that.
Okay.
It's not. I've just been promoted as a panelist. Yeah, I have what I think is a very quick question and then a comment that relates to one of the earlier comments that I also was a little confused about with regard to short-term rentals. But my question, which I hope has a quick answer, is that when I was about 10 years ago, council was working on an encroachment bylaw, which several of us paid attention to. And during the research for that, we discovered that there was a bylaw that had been passed, I believe, in the late 1800s that said that any building in Old Town that burned down could only be rebuilt if it was set back from the property line by a certain amount. Does the current plan, because I see that in the Old Town tables that you had, if I read them correctly, there's no setback required at all, because most of the houses like mine are right on the property line. But if my house were to burn down or be blown down by a hurricane, under that 1890 whatever bylaw, I wouldn't be allowed to use the current foundation. I'd have to move the house back. So is that being rescinded, or were people even aware of it? That's, do you want me to bring up my other issue now too, or just?
Sure, and then we'll deal with them both.
Okay, the other one is a comment, I guess, on the short-term rental, just in case people, I assume people are aware of this, but maybe you aren't. And it was, this summer was made even more difficult because we have a lot of the short-term rental spaces being taken up by the television production studio. And I know that they're doing some wonderful things for us economically, but the short-term rental thing, the growth in the Airbnb and similar kinds of situations where people see the quick money and realize that in a 4-month summer they can make more money than renting for a whole year, has created a problem of livability for many people in Lunenburg. And I'm talking about people who financially are not in a position to buy their own house or to rent more expensive facilities. And so you may have heard anecdotally that this is causing people to leave or not have any place to live. And I just wanted to mention that I have a personal acquaintance who is now living in a tent with her children because her house that she was in was being sold by at least that's, I believe it was a sale, but I don't have all the details, but what I do know is that she's living in a tent. It's just one example of perhaps many people who have been made homeless or had to leave the wonderful confines of Lunenburg because there are people who want to make a buck on this on the Airbnb style of investment. I realize, as our former mayor said, that it sounds like you have to have it as a primary residence. I hope there's no loopholes in that. I think it should be a primary residence in which you are living while your renters are there. You have to continue living in it if you want to rent it out for Airbnb. Otherwise, we shouldn't be allowing it. Our town is too small to have all of the rental accommodations swallowed up that way. And what will happen, of course, as time goes on and we become more successful selling the town to tourists, the demand for those kinds of spaces will go up, and it will be an exponential situation where eventually people won't be able to afford to live here at all. So my first was a technical question, and the second is I don't need an answer to, but I'd like the councillors to consider the amount of homelessness that they may be creating if they don't look at this short-term rental thing with a little bit more fervor. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, I'll look to the planning staff or the CAO to try and answer the first one regarding the bylaw about setbacks and whether that's been repealed or not.
Your worship, I'm not aware of any such bylaw, but it seems to be quite dated. So, but I'd be pleased to look at it if Mr. Friendly had any reference to it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, are there any questions of Mr. Friendly from council? All right, seeing none. Thank you, David. Is there anyone else looking to speak as part of the public hearing?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
My video may be here. I just wanted to point out that I know councillors didn't have questions of me, it seemed, but I did have questions of them. And I know that once the public hearing process is closed, I wouldn't have another opportunity to speak. So I'm wondering how I'm able to, if there's any discussion or what council has to say in response to the questions I posed of them.
So I think that would come in the debate portion. And I've got Sarah with a hand up on the other line. And just because she hasn't had a chance to speak, I'll circle back. Sarah?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there. My name is Sarah Colburn, and I own a property in Lunenburg at the corner of Lawrence and Prince Street. I just wanted to offer some feedback. I received a letter to an old address, so this is the first opportunity I have to be involved in this discussion. So thank you very much to all involved in the time that it seems you've all spent in consultation over a number of months. I just wanted to offer a counterpoint to some of the comments that have been raised around permanent residents. So I'm 43. I think I'm part of a demographic that Lunenburg and rural Nova Scotia hopes to attract, which is, a younger demographic that is really committed to having roots in Nova Scotia. And I consider Lunenburg my home. In my 20s, I was sailing on ships. It's when I was able to buy a property outside of my small condo in Halifax that I chose Lunenburg. And what I'm hearing and what I've experienced these last number of months in Lunenburg has made me feel less like a resident and less welcome there, because I think we are changing. I think that the on 6 months in one spot and off 6 months in another is really just not keeping pace with the direction that some of us are headed. I think more and more we're seeing in Lunenburg, Stelia and the gaming studios and people with very global work experiences that don't have them required to stay in a place all of the time. So what I'm offering is that the nature of my work allows me to be in Lunenburg for as much as the time as I can, in Halifax for some of the time and elsewhere for some of the time. So just would invite council to consider the changing demographic and also about the new demographics we hope to attract to the town, and about how we continue to make people feel welcome and progressive, as some of the pieces in the community plan are quite progressive. The notion of a permanent resident just being simply staying put 6 months of the time and then not isn't, I think, my reality. And I would offer that the other mid-career professionals that I know who have purchased property and are living in Lunenburg full-time or half the time, that isn't our experience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions of Sarah? All right. Seeing none, is there anyone else on the line who would like to speak? David, if that's a new hand, I think we've had everybody at their 10 minutes. So unless there's somebody new.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, all I wanted to do was, because I forgot before, was to mention that I live at 59 Duke Street.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
It's 7:30.
All right. Nobody else wishing to speak? I think we can be mindful of former Mayor Bailey's comments in the discussion. One last opportunity before I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. All right, seeing no one, there is a draft motion to close the public hearing, after which no further submissions will be considered. Is it anyone's pleasure to move that? Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, that takes us on to business arising. And we have the Stellar investment request, and which has been withdrawn. And so there is just a draft motion to reconfirm council's direction to discharge that motion? So is it anybody's pleasure to move that? Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Sanford. And moving both of the motions, there are two, or we can do them separately. The second one is just related to covering the costs associated with registering the discharge.
I'll move both.
Moving both. All right. Is there any discussion or debate on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right, that takes us on to item B, which is the proposed repeal and replacement of the MPS LUB and subdivision bylaw with specifications, as we just had the public hearing. There is a draft motion that's been provided by staff, and the non-substantial changes were sent to council in advance of the meeting. Is it anybody's pleasure to move that motion before discussing it? Moved by the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bertels, did you second? Yeah, seconded by Councillor Bertels. All right, the floor is open to discussion. Councillor Halverson.
Thanks, Your Worship. I do have a couple of questions. I'd like to follow up on some of the concerns that were raised by many of the people who made submissions, specifically on the short-term rentals. Maybe I could just get a little clarity, just so that we're all reassured. We all want to make sure that short-term rentals, don't drive long-term residents out or people who want to live here full-time, being sensitive, of course, to what Ms. Colburn was saying. But I would like to perhaps if Ian could address what is it that we need to do to ensure that we talk about there must be primary residences, or they need to be a hotel, only one short-term rental per lot, and they're not permitted in accessory buildings. And you mentioned something about a standalone bylaw. So if we go ahead with this motion tonight, what is it that we need to do to ensure that all these requirements are met so that we have the most effective short-term rental policy for Lunenburg?
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson. So yeah, I certainly appreciate the discussion around short-term rentals and how much of a, I guess, I don't hesitate to say hot topic, but important topic it is on all sides of the issue. We heard a lot through the CCP engagements and also through this plan about particularly concerns about housing access and affordability and the impacts of short-term rentals on that, as well as people seeing the potential benefits of them, renting out your home while you're traveling or whatever that may be. So the direction in the comprehensive community plan is to regulate short-term rentals, to recognize them. That's, the existing Lunenburg bylaws have some language related to tourist homes. It's not quite aligning up with, current practices in the industry. So the direction was to recognize them, define them, regulate them, and treat them differently, whether they were a primary residence or run as a business, either in a second home, or certainly there's individuals who buy up multiple properties for the express purpose of renting them out as on platforms like Airbnb. So what we have done in the current draft documents that are in front of you today, the municipal planning strategy land use bylaw, we have added that definition. There's a definition in the land use bylaw for short-term rentals, and we have regulated them to the extent that we feel is possible, and functionally possible through a land use bylaw. So one of the things we do is we do permit them as a use in any zone that permits residential uses. That's kind of a building block that's needed for the other half of this, which is the standalone bylaw. They need to be enabled to be regulated. And through the land use bylaw, we limit it to one per lot. And the thinking behind this is to prevent multi-unit dwellings from being purchased up and rented out as kind of de facto hotels. Some people call them ghost hotels. So that's one aspect of regulation, and we also don't permit them in accessory buildings. So that's basically to align or to address the fact that we're now allowing accessory dwellings, and really the intention of those was to increase housing options and housing affordability, and not to be used as short-term rentals. So that is what we do in the current documents, and that's what you would be adopting tonight. The challenge, and I recognize this, is that land use bylaws aren't really that great for regulating operational matters. We do it sometimes. If you look at the home-based business regulations in the bylaw, there's a cap on the number of employees and that kind of thing. It's kind of a kludge. It's really hard from a municipal enforcement point of view. The main time that you're dealing with development is when someone comes in for a development permit. You check, do you meet the requirements of the bylaw? Yes, no, permit, or no permit. And then if people break those requirements, you have to go and enforce on them. Operational requirements, things like residency status, are one of those things that are like, okay, so Arthur can check that when you come in for your permit. What happens if you move away 6 months from now and it's not your primary residence anymore? How do we ever know? And, as I mentioned, you do regulate operational things sometimes in bylaws, but often they don't get enforced on unless there's a really egregious situation. And then, someone has a home-based business and it's clear that they have 20 employees there, sort of thing. So expecting that short-term rentals are going to be a bigger issue, and that you don't want to be using the land use bylaw mechanisms all the time as the primary tool to regulate things like primary residency or annual health inspections, if that's a desire, or that kind of thing. The CCP, the Comprehensive Community Plan, recommends a standalone short-term rental bylaw. And so through that, you could have the requirement, for example, for annual licensing. Someone would have to come in and renew their license, reprove their primary residence, that the building's their primary residence, or whatever it may be. You could require things like inspections, whatever you wanted to through that licensing bylaw, basically. So it is really a much better tool in our view for that kind of thing. So I guess you're asking, what does council need to do? I guess is to enable short-term rentals, and then also really put the priority on having that primary tool, that key tool of a bylaw in place to really give you the fine-grained ability to regulate them appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that you answered my question. I think at the next step for us, I guess, is to come up with a bylaw and look to staff to do that at some point. I would assume we're going to do that in short order once we get all of this dealt with. I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but maybe I'll look to Ms. Renton if what she is there a timeline we have in mind at this point, or maybe perhaps his worship, if do we have a timeline in mind for when our residents can expect us to start working on that bylaw?
It is one of the 35 priority directions. I believe it's deferred until next year. I could be wrong about that, but it's on the list.
Okay. Just want to make sure people know we're working on it. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion or debate from council? Councillor Halverson.
I'm trying to leave space for everyone to ask questions, but all right. I do have one more concern. Ms. Nona White, when she made her presentations, again, Ian, when you responded to her, I think you explained it quite well, but I did notice the one thing that really didn't seem to be addressed was the issue of the devalue of her parents' property. If they did want at some point to, to sell to a developer, and the fact that it's now designated as parks, it could be an issue. Trying to sell that. So I don't know. You mentioned, perhaps you could be a little, maybe clear this up for me a bit, but you did mention that there was a mixed use zone along Victoria, but part of that property is park. So how would that work? So if Ms. White's parents wanted to move that property along, say the developer came along, they would only be allowed to do parks on one side and some mixed development on the other. That's kind of hard and fast. Is that right?
So through the chair to you, Councillor Halverson. Correct. Yeah. So I hesitate to comment too much on the idea of value of land. I think it's something we, in theory, we play around a lot with when we do any of these planning exercises. Whenever you change the zoning on land, I suspect the perceived value of most of the town of Lunenburg has changed in some way as a result of these documents, or would if they're adopted as is. Rights have increased or decreased in various areas. We try not to decrease generally, but sometimes it happens. The issue of split zoning. So maybe if it's all right, can I share my screen here? So the area in question is here, north of Victoria Road, Hurdle. The property lines are in these light gray areas. And so part of this is, part of making these zoning maps is a balance between precision and usability, I suppose. So certainly, in identifying in the CCP, the area that was ideal for a potential park, was the wetter area here on the southern portion, but also for the purposes of coming into the municipality and getting permits, and Arthur or other staff being able to clearly see where the line is. We often try and stick to property lines as much as possible, or very identifiable features. So we have split on the use zoning map. These properties are split down the middle, and the portion in the orangey brown is in that commercial mixed use zone. So that's actually, I suspect in most cases, is a kind of upgrade in terms of what's permitted. Again, we're really emphasizing that that main street commercial type character around here, and really want to encourage that. So the front half of this, so you could call it the front half of these lands, is within that zone. Along Victoria Road allows things like multi-unit development, residential development, a wide range of commercial uses. And then, yes, the back portion is in that parks and recreation zone, which primarily allows parks and recreation uses, but as I mentioned previously, does allow some semi-commercial stuff, takeout restaurants, or commercial recreation that, that could be things like paintball fields or driving ranges, or those I think pretty evident commercial recreation type uses.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor Halverson?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Oops, hit the wrong button there for a second. Thank you, Worship. While we're along this, specifically talking about this area, Ian, so, but let's say, for instance, the current owners want to continue to, the current land use, I guess what I'm asking, will continue on as long as it can be in that state. So the family can pass it on to another generation, or I could go and say, buy it from them and say, I'm quite happy with what it's being used for right now. It's a lot of agricultural land there. I might want to be a has some goats there or something like that. Could that be, does that continue on as is?
Yeah, through the chair to the deputy mayor. Yeah, that's exactly. So if you recall in my presentation, I touched on the idea of non-conforming uses. So if there are existing uses, when we change the zoning on a property, assuming they were legal at the time, you can't have an illegal use and then have it all of a sudden be fine. But as long as they're legally existing, even if we change the zoning, the Municipal Government Act recognizes those, gives them protection. They're allowed, we don't go in and shut you down. They're still allowed to continue. That's also independent of ownership. So it could pass through inheritance, it could pass through sale. As I mentioned, non-conforming uses. So the way the Municipal Government Act says is, the idea is that over time, property should move towards what its zoning intends. So the Municipal Government Act says if a non-conforming use is discontinued, you have up to 6 months to recontinue it and preserve those rights. So if you shut down your restaurant in the neighborhood area and open it up again 3 months later, you're good. But if you wait 2 years, you're not. Again, we recognize that that's a really short time, and we extended it through the documents to a year, but there is still that year. So if that use was to discontinue for more than a year, then yeah, then the expectation would be that it would meet the new zoning.
Deputy Mayor with a follow-up.
Yeah, and the same ideology would be like with Blockhouse Hill or anywhere else. The current use would continue on until you would want to initiate the change. If you didn't want to initiate the change, could stay there forever.
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions of council? Any further discussion or debate? Councillor Sanford. You're muted, Councillor Sanford.
Sorry about that. I was apologizing because I was slow to jump into the discussion about short-term rentals. So I just wanted to add in that the short-term rental piece is complex, and I think we really need to look closely at the short-term rental and be very clear when we're talking about homes where we have absentee homeowners that are renting for profit, period, and distinguish between homeowners that are living in their homes, renting out portions of their homes to support them to live here year-round, because there are many, many expenses coming from maintenance of large older homes, trying to heat them, trying to pay the taxes and so on. So I think we want to be very mindful and very clear in our conversations and our discussions about short-term rentals. When we get a bylaw in place in the context of short-term rentals, our challenge is the uniqueness of Lunenburg. And Lunenburg, as many of us know, is a summer destination for many folks. So there's a significant number of homes that have come off the market because they're summer homes or they're vacation residents for people that may come a month out of the year. And I know, and I really appreciate Sarah helping to raise the awareness about the changing, the new demographic that's here in Lunenburg. And I think we want to be mindful of that, again, as we discuss short-term rentals and what the pros and the cons are for supporting residents to live here year-round. I think what's going to be challenging, like short-term rental has kind of been the flavor of the day for the last 2 years. It's been really the hot button topic. Everybody's been talking about it. But I'm sure most folks in this meeting are watching, as we're coming through this pandemic, watching other hot button topics emerge that contribute to our shortage of housing and affordable housing. And that's in the context of, we have people moving interprovincially. So we have a significant number of folks that are coming here from, say, British Columbia and Ontario. And we're really glad they're coming and want to welcome, a big shout out and welcome them all. However, the fury in buying in the current real estate market is driving prices up. And that has absolutely nothing to do with short-term rentals. So the issue's complex. It's complex because we have summer residences. It's complex because we're now in a frenzy with real estate market. And it's complex because we haven't necessarily seen the development that kept in step with what the community needed over the years. So again, I caution us when we start to talk about short-term rentals, if we can just really look very closely, be very specific about whether we're talking about in-home short-term rental, whether we're talking about complete housing rentals, and talking about absentee homeowners. So I just wanted to put that in there, and hopefully people will just kind of percolate with that. And as we move forward to developing a bylaw, I hope we hear from many people that can weigh in and help us as we make those decisions to shape our bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Any further discussion or debate? Any further questions, council? All right, just as a matter of procedure, I will remind council that you do have the right to defer this or to make changes, and then we would go, correct me if I'm wrong here, Arthur, back to first reading and have another public hearing with a changed version.
That is correct.
Okay.
Through the chair.
All right, seeing last chance for any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. All right, that takes us on to item C, which is the resubmission for funding under the Municipal Innovation Program. I will turn it over to staff to speak to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Council will recall, we had applied for this funding earlier this year and were unsuccessful. However, just days before the deadline, Municipal Affairs reached out and encouraged us to resubmit. And so they're looking for a supporting motion of that application. Chester had passed theirs last week, and they're looking for the same from Lunenburg.
Okay. Is it anybody's pleasure to move that draft motion as presented? Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Is there any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. There are 3 sets of committee meetings. There are no recommendations emanating from them. That takes us on to new business. Proposed regional emergency bylaw, emergency management financial authorizations, and comfort center agreement. And I believe we have the regional emergency management coordinator, Angela, with us to make a presentation on that. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct. I'm just trying to start my video, but it's not allowing me to. There. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share screen. I've got 3 updates that I actually need to provide today. And I need you to apologize. I don't generally use Zoom, so I'm just trying to pull up my presentation there. Can you see my presentation now? Yes, thank you. So the 3 that I've got, thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm going to be going through 3 updates. The first will be the emergency management bylaw. And I'm not sure if you want to do the motion at the end before we continue on. You can decide that.
We can do the motion at the end, Angela, but could you just do a slideshow, or you're not maximized on your screen?
Oh, is that better?
Perfect.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So the emergency management bylaw, to give some background and purpose, the emergency management bylaw in 2017, Town of Lunenburg joined the Regional Emergency Management Organization through the Intermunicipal Services Agreement. Within that agreement, it does state that the bylaws between the 5 units need to be consistent, and there is no consistency right now. So some of the background to it is the Emergency Management Act states that the responsibility for the health and welfare of the public rests with the elected officials of municipal government. So that's all of you. Within each of the municipalities, we have the capabilities to treat any emergency as they arise. The benefits of having a regional is that we can all work together to work toward having the emergency rectified as soon as possible, and we can lean on each other for both equipment resources as well as human resources. So within the 5 municipal units, the Intermunicipal Services Agreement, it originally started in 1994 with the municipality, the District of Lunenburg, and Town of Bridgewater. In 2005, Mahone Bay and Chester joined, and then in 2007, Town of Lunenburg joined. So following the Intermunicipal Services Agreement being updated, item 22 does state that the parties agree to pass a complementary bylaw. So right now, where it stands, we've got kind of 2 different levels of bylaw. In 2014-15, Town of Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and Chester updated theirs. However, Municipality of Lunenburg and Town of Lunenburg are both outdated. So we're suggesting a repeal and replace in order for all 5 to be consistent. So in the Municipal Services Agreement, which was included in the agenda package, it provides us some planning and coordinated response to the emergency within Lunenburg County. Municipality of Lunenburg is the host municipality. They also have the main Emergency Coordination Center, or ECC, and Chester has a secondary one. Each of the 5 units do agree to have an Assistant Emergency Management Coordinator. For Town of Lunenburg, it's Paul Bracken. And then the budget itself is divided based upon uniform assessment, and it is presented before February 1st of every year, and is presented, and at least 51% or 2 of the units have to approve it in order for the budget to pass. Also within the Intermunicipal Services Agreement, it does state that we need to have an advisory committee. So this is the mayors and wardens plus an elected official or alternate who represents each unit. And we need to have quorum for each of the meetings, so it's 50% plus 1. They're responsible for the direction and management of the emergency preparedness activities. So many times I'll be presenting to the advisory. In some cases, things come back to the municipal units. In many cases, it doesn't need to, because within the Emergency Management Act, it does state that if we have a regional emergency management organization, that the council is in essence made up of the mayors and wardens or elected official that is represented on the advisory committee. So to quote it, it does say that the minister may designate a combination of municipalities or parts of a municipality for the purpose of the act. And what this does is it does allow us to vote without having to go back to the councils, as I indicated. Within the Emergency Management Act, there are duties and powers that the municipalities have. So mainly it is to establish and maintain an emergency management bylaw, have a municipal organization, which we do have, appoint a coordinator, which is myself, and having a committee of the municipal council to advise on the emergency management plans. So that's the advisory committee. And then ultimately, I prepare the emergency management plans with the assistance of getting information from each of the 5 municipal units through the AECs and their CAOs. And then I take it up to the advisory committee and they approve the overarching plan. To differentiate what Emergency Management Office does at the provincial level is subject to the approval. They review and approve the plans that the municipality provides. They record the actual potential hazards within an emergency. So they do some studies and surveys. They also do studies and surveys for the effective emergency management preparation of the plans, conduct public information programs, conduct training and exercises. They can help procure food, clothing, any of the resources or equipment that we need to in the case of an emergency. And with regard to that, what the levels is it is always required at the municipal level to expend our resources before we can go up to the province. If they expend their resources at that time is when they can ask the federal government. So there are very defined levels with which we need to actually expend before we can actually move up to the next level. And then finally, we can authorize and require the implementation of the emergency management plan. So that's what the Emergency Management Office, so Nova Scotia EMO, would do. So we provide the plans locally, send it up to them for review. And just to also differentiate, there is two different types of state of emergency. We're probably much more aware of it after the last, year and a half, 2 years that we've had. Obviously, we've got the state of emergency. So that's declared at the provincial level. It's always effective for 14 days unless it's terminated. Upon 14 days is when they can renew it. And then at the local level, we have the state of local emergency. So there is a difference. The state of local emergency is then declared by the mayor, warden, or council, and it's only in effect for 7 days, and at which time it can either be renewed or terminated. So within both of the states of emergencies, the special powers that are allowable is to do everything necessary for the protection of property, health, or safety. So we can confiscate property, prevent price gouging, require assistance, control or prohibit travel, we can enter without having a warrant, or cause for or order an evacuation. So we have seen some of those things throughout the state of emergency. If we had to declare a state of local emergency, it would be those same things that we would actually be able to enact should we need to. And within the Lunenburg County, so within the 5, we've actually only ever had to declare one state of local emergency, as that was in 2005 for the Hebbville area flooding. So thankfully, we haven't had to do it very often, but it is there should we need to enact it at any point. So the considerations ultimately is the town of Mahone Bay, Bridgewater, and municipality of Chester. They have some small amendments that were recommended in order to have consistent bylaws across 5 units. However, for municipality of Lunenburg and town of Lunenburg, since they were outdated and does not reflect the current intermunicipal services agreement, it is recommended to repeal and replace. So that's what's coming to us today. Were there any questions that I could answer with regard to the bylaw?
All right, we'll open up the floor for questions, if there are questions of Angela. All right, seeing none. Thank you for the presentation, Angela. And there are 3 draft motions provided. Is it anyone's pleasure to move any or all of those? Deputy Mayor, with this, all 3, yes. And Councillor Bertle seconding all 3. All right. Is there any discussion?
You need to talk about either 2.
Oh, you had presentations for the other 2 as well?
I didn't have a presentation. I was just going to go into a little bit of detail if it's needed, but if it's understood, then we don't need to.
Is it understood? Okay.
Okay, perfect.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. Have a great night.
All right, and the final item of business for the public agenda tonight is a special event application from the Lunenburg Art Gallery Society for Lunenburg Arts Festival Town, the Lunenburg Arts Festival, sorry, special event. So I will see if staff wants to speak to that.
Thanks, Your Worship. The application is in order. So if council wanted to pass a motion approving the issuance of the special event permit, we'd notify the group that they're fine to proceed. They're going to be operating in various locations around town, and they've met the requirements of the bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Is it anyone's pleasure to move that the special event permit application be granted? Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Duggan. Is there any discussion or debate? Councillor Halverson.
I would just actually add a comment that it's I'm relieved to see life returning to normal in Lunenburg, and this is part of that summer experience. So that's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. All right, now I need a motion to meet in camera to discuss lease and contract negotiations. Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Councillor Bertels. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. We'll take a 10-minute recess with council's consent and reconvene in camera at 8:15.